Radio chatter snapped through the static, jagged with panic. 427 Rangers were pinned in a valley where the mountains closed like jaws. Mortars bracketing closer, ammo running low. Every ridge alive with muzzle flashes. In the command post miles away, officers whispered of expected casualties. The withdrawal plan was already being drafted. Numbers on paper. Names about to become memorials. Down in the dirt, a figure steadied her breathing. Sergeant First Class Maya Torres, 32 years old, Army sniper. Overlooked in every briefing because snipers don't lead battles. Rangers knew her only for the ink on her arm, a hawk feather tattoo, dismissed as superstition. But in the hour when doctrine failed, she would see what others could not. They said she was just a shooter. But in that valley, she became the reason 427 Rangers walked out alive. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sergeant First Class Maya Torres had always been more shadow than spotlight. Born in San Juan, raised in El Paso, she was the daughter of a Vietnam veteran who carried scars both visible and silent. Her father, Staff Sergeant Manuel Torres, rarely spoke of the jungle, but Maya had grown up watching him clean an old M14 rifle with reverence. He taught her that marksmanship was more than hitting a target. It was discipline, patience, and respect for the weapon in her hands. By 16, she could outshoot nearly every boy at the local range. By 18, she was already chasing something beyond small-town expectations. At sniper school, she left no doubt. Top of her class, she earned reputation for uncanny focus. Reading wind shifts by the sway of grass, adjusting breathing to the rhythm of her heart. Instructors nodded, impressed. But when the course ended, the same men who praised her accuracy often passed her over when leadership slots opened. "She's steady with a rifle," they'd say quietly, "but she's not command material." The mocking from peers stung sharper. Some Rangers treated her as a novelty, our sharpshooter mascot, they'd joke around the fire. Others dismissed her with quick labels, "Good shot, quiet type," but no sense of tactics. She never shouted back. Instead, Maya listened, learned, and wrote. Always wrote. Always wrote. Her journals became her hidden arsenal. Page after page filled with sketches of valleys, ridgelines, and movement patterns. She drew arrows where ambushes could be staged, dotted circles where mortar teams would dig in, and highlighted corridors where withdrawal could be cut off. She studied terrain like scripture, marking each fold as if one day it might save lives. Most of the platoon thought it was obsessive. A few teased her relentlessly, over-prepared Torres with her bedtime diaries. She kept her head down and her pencil moving. 2 nights before the operation, the Rangers crowded into a briefing room at the forward operating base. The air reeked of burnt coffee and sweat-stained uniforms. Maps covered the wall, red markers outlining the planned route through a mountain valley. The mission looked straightforward: sweep through, disrupt enemy supply caches, return before dusk. The room buzzed with routine confidence. Maya sat near the back, notebook balanced on her knee. As the commander pointed to the map, she noticed the way enemy movement reports clustered oddly positions, too clean, too deliberate. It looked less like a supply chain and more like a funnel. A trap waiting for a column to step inside. She raised her hand quietly. "Sir," she began, her voice steady, "those patrol patterns, they're too symmetrical. What if they're trying to lure us deeper? We could be walking into a kill box." The room fell silent for a beat. Lieutenant Colonel Barrett turned, his jaw tight, then gave a tired half smile. "Noted, Torres. But we'll stick to Overwatch protocol. Your job is to keep eyes on our flanks and do what you do best. Leave the big picture to command." The dismissal was polite but cutting. A ripple of chuckles went through the room. One Ranger leaned toward another and whispered, "Sniper thinks she's Napoleon." Another muttered, "Stick to your scope, Torres." Maya said nothing. She closed her notebook and tucked it under her arm. But as she walked out of the room, her gut told her the truth. Something about this mission was wrong. At dawn, the Rangers loaded into vehicles and moved toward the valley. The air was brittle with cold, sun still hiding behind the peaks. Maya rode in the back of a Humvee, her rifle laid across her lap, gloved fingers tracing the feather tattoo on her forearm. She had gotten it years ago, the hawk feather, to remind herself of clarity and vision. The others saw it as decoration, a bit of superstition. She knew better. It meant she'd never ignore what her eyes told her, even when others dismissed it. The convoy rolled off dirt roads into the first folds of the valley. At first, everything seemed calm. Too calm. The birds that normally scattered from engine noise were absent. No dogs barked from distant villages. The silence pressed heavy on the men. Boots crunched against gravel, rifles clinked softly as the patrol spread out. Maya felt her pulse steady as she scanned the ridges. The angles, the shadows, the ridge lines, they all lined up too perfectly. Rock formations gave easy cover for heavy weapons. Narrow choke points forced them into predictable lanes. Her father's words echoed, "If the ground feels like it's guiding you, it's not guiding you, it's trapping you." She slowed her pace, eyes narrowing, listening for what wasn't there. A raven should have cried somewhere above. A shepherd's goat bell should have chimed faintly across the hills. Instead, the valley swallowed sound. The ranger column pushed deeper, banter fading to uneasy silence. One man muttered, "Feels like the whole mountain's holding its breath." Another gave a forced laugh, but his knuckles whitened on his rifle grip. Maya's eyes darted to a glint of metal high on a ridge. Not sunlight, too sharp, too deliberate. She knew the look of a scope when it caught morning light. She opened her radio, about to report, but command chatter cut across. Logistics updates, minor adjustments. Her warning would sound like nerves. Again. Still, her hand tightened on her rifle. The valley ahead stretched wide and jagged, a perfect amphitheater for destruction. Her notes had said it, her instincts screamed it. The trap was about to close, and when it did, she would have to decide whether to follow orders or follow the truth she'd seen all along. Mortars screamed down from the ridgelines, concussions tearing through earth and steel. The first salvo shredded the lead vehicles, fire and black smoke curling into the pale sky. Then came the gunfire waves of it, pouring from every ridge like a flood unleashed. Machine guns barked from the east, rifles cracked from the north, RPGs traced smoke trails from the west. The Rangers, spread in a long column, were suddenly exposed in a natural bowl with nowhere to hide. "Contact left, contact right, 3 sides," someone shouted over the comms. The words hardly mattered, every man could see it. 427 Rangers, trapped in a perfect kill box. Maya hit the dirt, her body pressed flat against the gravel. Pebbles dug into her cheek as she slid her rifle into position. Through her scope, the valley lit up in chaos dust clouds, muzzle flashes, the sudden stillness of men cut down mid-movement. On the command net, voices overlapped in clipped urgency. "Pull back! We're surrounded! Hold position until air support!" A cooler voice cut through, belonging to a senior officer. "Casualty projections are being drafted. Prepare for possible withdrawal. Withdrawal." That meant abandoning the wounded. That meant breaking the column, leaving bodies behind to be counted later. Maya clenched her jaw. She had seen this before in history books, commands writing off men while they were still fighting for breath. She keyed her mic. "This is Sergeant Torres. Request permission to shift to high ground, counter sniper, and overwatch role. I have lanes." A pause. Then Colonel Barrett's voice, sharp, clipped. "Negative. Hold sector. We need you covering right flank." "That's an order." Her stomach turned. Cover one sector? Against hundreds of enemy shooters pouring fire from 3 ridges? It was the tactical equivalent of bailing water from a sinking ship with a tin cup. Another mortar shrieked overhead and detonated close, flinging dirt across her face. The blast rattled her bones, but her breathing slowed instead of quickening. She pressed her lips together and made her choice. Maya clicked her radio off the command net, leaving only the Ranger local channel alive. Then she began to crawl. Inch by inch, using the folds in the terrain she had memorized from her notebooks, she slid away from her assigned sector and climbed higher. Dirt clung to her gloves, her pack scraped against stone, but she moved like a ghost. The higher she crawled, the more the valley opened to her scope. And then she saw them. Enemy sniper teams perched on rocky spurs, methodical, patient. One had already zeroed on Lieutenant Daniels, a platoon leader crouched behind a smoking Humvee. Another lined up a medic, dragging a wounded ranger to cover. Maya exhaled slowly, steadying her rifle. This is why I studied every fold, every angle. She adjusted for wind, half a click right. Squeezed. The first enemy sniper dropped, his rifle clattering against the rocks. She shifted without hesitation, found the second shooter adjusting his scope, and dropped him too. On the ground below, Daniels felt the near miss. A round had cracked inches from his head, a heartbeat, before silence claimed the ridge. He blinked, disoriented, then realized someone had killed the sniper who had him in his sights. "Who's killing these shooters?" a ranger shouted through the chaos. Another voice answered, awe mixed with disbelief. "Somebody up there's watching us." Maya didn't answer. She rolled to another position, keeping her profile low. Another mortar crew was adjusting tubes on the north ridge. If they fired again, they'd tear the center of the column apart. Through her scope, she could see the loader's nervous hands fumbling shells. She took him first, then the gunner, then the spotter who froze in horror. 3 shots, 3 bodies crumpling against stone. The mortars went quiet. Below, the rangers seized the breath she had bought them, dragging wounded, returning fire in organized bursts. Daniels pressed a bloody hand against his thigh, warm red seeping through his fingers. Pain fogged his mind, but his radial hand was steady. He switched channels until he found her voice. "Torres," he rasped, ducking as bullets sparked against the metal beside him. "I don't know how you're doing it, but you're buying us seconds." He swallowed hard, the taste of iron filling his mouth. "Keep going." Maya exhaled, her cheek still pressed against the stock of her rifle. Her eyes narrowed on another glint of glass far across the valley. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need permission. She only needed targets and the will to keep 427 men alive long enough to walk out of this valley. And with every shot, the balance began to shift. Maya wiped dust from her cheek and slid her eye back to the scope. The valley below was chaos, muzzle flashes sparking from every ridge, mortars coughing black smoke, the rangers scrambling for what little cover existed. But amid the noise, she could see patterns. The enemy wasn't random. They were pressing in coordinated waves, pushing the rangers tighter into the bowl. It was a trap, just as she'd warned. Her hand brushed against the edge of her notebook inside her vest pocket. Every late night she'd spent sketching valleys and ridge lines now came rushing back. She knew the tempo of ambushes, the rhythm of fire patterns. And she could bend those rhythms. She slowed her breathing and began firing in calculated bursts. 2 rounds here, then silence. 5 quick shots there, then another pause. Each sequence came from a different angle as she crawled along the ridge. To anyone listening, or anyone on the receiving end, it sounded like multiple snipers firing in concert. Down below, rangers pinned against a shattered wall lifted their heads in brief amazement. "That's not just one shooter," a private muttered. "We've got a whole team covering us." The illusion spread like oxygen to a drowning man. Hope disguised as gunfire. Across the valley, an enemy mortar team began setting up again, their silhouettes etched against the sky. They thought they were out of reach, safe at that distance. Maya dialed her scope, adjusted for the thin mountain air, and steadied her heartbeat. The loader bent over the tube. Crack! He collapsed. The gunner froze mid-motion, then fell with a second crack. The spotter turned, shouting for cover. Her third round punched him backward. Silence rippled where thunder should have been. The mortar tubes sat unmanned, useless. The rangers below erupted in fresh bursts of fire, emboldened. But success drew attention. Enemy fighters began scanning for the phantom sniper. Tracers shifted upward, raking the rocks where Maya had been minutes before. She slid to her belly and crawled, every movement deliberate. Dirt filled her gloves, her elbows raw from scraping stone. She reached a new outcropping, but left behind a decoy, her helmet perched on a jagged rock, shadowed just enough to mimic a head. Minutes later, the ridge exploded under incoming fire, hundreds of rounds chewing the decoy to pieces. Maya smirked grimly, already 2 positions away, her scope hunting again. She repeated the dance twice more. Fire, shift, leave a false silhouette. Each time the enemy wasted ammunition hammering empty stone. Each time she reappeared elsewhere, her rifle carving space for her brothers to breathe. On the Ranger local net, whispers began to spread. "Whoever's up there is running this whole fight." Another voice answered, quiet with awe. "That's Torres. It has to be." Lieutenant Daniels, bloodied but alive, heard the murmurs. He pressed his radio, forcing strength into his tone. "Keep following her fire. She's not just covering us, she's directing us." And in that moment, beneath the weight of fire and stone, the 427 Rangers began to fight not with despair, but with rhythm. A rhythm set by a lone sniper who refused to stay in her lane. The order cracked across the command net with the finality of a hammer. Colonel Barrett's voice carried no hesitation. Protocol demanded it. A lone sniper shifting outside her sector was a liability. Risk stacked upon risk. Doctrine didn't allow for improvisation at this scale. Maya's finger hovered near her radio switch. A mortar shell landed somewhere behind her, rattling the rocks, filling the air with dust and metal. She closed her eyes for half a breath. If she obeyed, the Rangers below would be swallowed in minutes. If she disobeyed, her career might end here, her name buried under the word insubordination. She flipped the switch, cutting herself off from command. The only channel alive now was the Ranger local net, the voices of the men still pinned in the valley. Her voice came calm, steady, unshaken. "Listen up. Follow my marks. Move when I fire. Trust me." There was silence for a beat, gunfire still echoing around them. Then a young Ranger answered, his tone half belief, half desperation. "Copy that." Maya squeezed off 2 shots, deliberate and sharp. Both struck the ridge, just above a hostile machine gun nest. Bound left. Now. The nearest squad obeyed, sprinting low across a stretch of open ground. Enemy fire tried to rake them, but Maya's rounds stitched just ahead of their movement, suppressing every muzzle that dared peek over stone. The Rangers reached cover alive. "Second team, on my next fire." She tapped the trigger, 1, 2, 3 shots in rhythm. Another squad dashed, and again her rifle carved a corridor through the chaos. Voices grew steadier over the net. "She's calling the fight. Just do what she says. Torres has us covered." Instead of fracturing, the 427 Rangers found themselves moving with precision, their scattered fear knitting into cohesion around the rhythm of one sniper's fire. Every crack of her rifle was a command. Every pause, a warning. Every bound, a promise that someone up there saw farther than they could. And down in the dust and smoke, hardened Rangers who had once mocked her notebook obsession realized they were alive only because Sergeant First Class Maya Torres had refused to stop pulling the trigger. The valley churned with dust and fire, but a rhythm had emerged inside the chaos. Every crack of Maya's rifle wasn't just a shot, it was a command. She marked ridgelines with half-second bursts, stitched rocks just above machine gun nests, and carved corridors where none had existed before. "First squad, on me," she called into the local net. Her 3 shots rang out, neat and deliberate. Rangers sprinted forward, ducking under fire, their helmets nearly brushing the rounds she laid inches above them. Not one man fell. "Second squad, go." Another series of measured cracks. Again, the enemy recoiled under her precise storm, and again, the Rangers moved alive from one fold of earth to the next. Even hardened veterans hesitated in awe. Bullets zipped so close they could feel the heat past their ears, yet each shot struck exactly where it had to. No misses, no wasted rounds. For the first time that day, disbelief gave way to something else. Trust. High above the valley, Colonel Barrett stood over a drone feed in the operations center. His staff crowded around, maps scattered across tables. At first they had cursed her for abandoning orders. Now the picture told another truth. One ACOG scope, one rifle, was orchestrating 427 men out of a kill box. Barrett leaned closer, jaw tight, then spoke low enough for the room to still. "That's not just a sniper. That's a battlefield commander." His words carried weight. An operations officer, pale with adrenaline, glanced up. "Sir, should we issue?" Barrett cut him off. "Get it on the net. All stations, follow Torres's fire." Moments later, the message rippled through the radios, crackling into ears across the valley. Squads pinned against crumbling walls, medics shielding the wounded, machine gunners running low on belts. All heard the same words: follow Torres's fire. And for the first time since the trap had sprung, the Rangers didn't feel surrounded. They felt led. The enemy knew their trap was collapsing. They had poured men and fire into the valley expecting the Rangers to break, but instead, the Americans were moving, deliberate, precise, alive. Each bound forward stole momentum from the ambush. Desperation clawed at the enemy lines. Then came their final push. From the ridges on the north slope, RPG teams began crawling closer, shadows darting from boulder to boulder. The crack and hiss of rockets split the air, warheads exploding within 30 meters of the Ranger line. Shards of shrapnel-peppered helmets and armor, smoke choking the narrow ground. The Rangers hugged cover, pinned once again. Maya adjusted her scope, heart steady. She tracked one RPG gunner lifting his launcher, bead fixed on a cluster of Rangers dragging wounded. The angle was perfect for disaster. She slowed her breathing, let the world shrink to a circle of glass, and squeezed. Her round hit dead center through the gunner's scope, shattering steel and glass into his eye. In the same breath, she shifted half an inch and sent a second shot through the chest of his spotter. Both bodies folded before the launcher hit the dirt. On the Ranger net, a stunned voice whispered, "She split the shot, through the scope. Keep moving." Maya cut in, voice calm as stone. She directed smoke grenades into the wind, their plumes drifting into a wall of gray that masked Ranger movement. Through the haze, she called fields of fire like a conductor. "Machine guns right, walk it uphill. Alpha team, push through smoke left." "Bravo, bound on my second mark." Her rifle cracked 3 times, marking the edge of a corridor she had mapped weeks ago in her journal. A shallow fold in the ridge, barely visible unless you had studied it by hand. To command it had been a line on a map. To Maya, it was survival. The Rangers flowed into the fold. Crossfires lit up behind them, Maya's shots carving space just wide enough for breathing room. Every time an enemy muzzle flashed, she stitched the rock in front of it, the ricochets silencing fire before it could cut men down. The valley thundered with organized chaos, smoke curling, Rangers shouting, bullets stitching arcs through stone. And above it all, one calm voice guided the rhythm: "Move now! Hold 2. Push on 3. Go!" Minutes stretched like hours, but the line moved. 427 men and women clawed their way through the valley under her cover. Then the sound every Ranger had prayed for roared over the ridges, the chopping thunder of helicopter blades. Chinooks lumbered into sight, Apaches orbiting above them like hawks. Dust clouds erupted as the first bird flared into a landing zone. Rangers surged toward salvation, but the enemy wasn't finished. On the far ridge, their commander, a scarred fighter known only as the Falcon, stood tall, rallying the last of his men. Through Maya's scope, she saw him shouting, his arm raised, fighters clustering at his signal. If he broke their momentum now, the retreat could collapse. She checked the distance, over 1,700 yards. Just under a mile. Wind curled through the valley, carrying grit against her cheek. A mile shot was improbable even in perfect conditions. With wind and dust, it was madness. Maya breathed slow. She thought of her father cleaning his rifle in the quiet of their garage, telling her, "Discipline isn't about the easy shot. It's about the one no one else believes you can make." She adjusted left, a hair for wind, elevated her reticle just above the man's chest. Her finger squeezed, steady as prayer. The rifle cracked. For a heartbeat, the Falcon kept shouting, Then the bullet struck, folding him mid-gesture. His men froze, their leader collapsing into the dust. Silence rippled across the ridge as if the mountains themselves exhaled. From the ranger net came a voice, breathless and raw. She dropped him. At a mile. The last resistance crumbled. Fighters scattered, some throwing weapons down, others vanishing into the stone. The helicopters lifted rangers by the dozen, rotors thrashing dust into the air. The valley, moments before a tomb, was suddenly a corridor to life. Maya remained on her ridge, scanning for threats until the final chalk lifted. Her rifle barrel smoked, hands steady, eyes unblinking. Only when the last helicopter cleared the ridgeline did she let herself whisper, "All out." And with that, the battle was over. When the last helicopter touched down at the forward operating base, the sun was already slipping behind the mountains. Dust clung to the uniforms of every ranger as they staggered off the ramps, faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. Medics rushed forward, triaging the wounded, wrapping bandages, moving stretchers. But amid the chaos came the realization whispered from man to man, 427 accounted for. Every single one of them. Not a mass casualty event. Not a memorial. They were alive. Maya walked back from her ridge hours later, rifles slung across her shoulder, boots heavy with grit. She expected silence, perhaps suspicion, maybe even scorn for breaking orders. Instead, she found the lime. Rangers had gathered shoulder to shoulder, dusty, bloodied, but standing at attention. Colonel Barrett stepped forward first. His voice was sharp, official. "Sergeant Torres, you left your sector. You disregarded direct orders." The words hung heavy in the hot evening air. She braced herself, chin high, but then his tone shifted. "You also guided 427 Rangers out of a kill box. You rewrote the doctrine on what a sniper could do." "She didn't disobey," he said louder now, his gaze sweeping over the line of men. "She saved the Rangers. She rewrote the book." For a long moment, the formation held silent. Then, almost as one, every Ranger raised their hand in salute. The sound of boots clicking echoed down the line. No cheers, no shouts, just the deep, wordless respect of warriors who knew who had bought their lives with steady breath and steady fire. Maya swallowed hard, her own salute sharp in return. It was the kind of salute that carries through generations, a moment etched deeper than any medal. They mocked her for being just a sniper. They silenced her when she saw what others missed. But in that valley, Maya Torres proved that one steady hand, one calm eye, could rewrite the fate of 427 Rangers. If this story moved you, salute in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of valor. Until next time, stay strong, stay proud, and never forget those who serve.